PSU Sports Night to keep up with all the action. For all my colleagues, we
Welcome
are
back to
Penn
Top
State Sports
Prospects.
Night.
Logan, I know it's been a long time. I'd like to first of all apologize to the viewers here. We missed the entire stretch run. I mean, granted, both of our teams missed the entire stretch run there too. So I guess it fit in pretty well that both Mets and Phillies choked down the stretch. And as a podcast, I take responsibility for us choking down the stretch here.
Yeah, and not only did we kind of choke as a podcast, the Mets and Phillies kind of choked while we were gone. I think the Mets and Phillies kind of needed us to actually do our podcast. Rather, we kind of skipped out. We missed a lot after the trade deadline. And we missed so much. We evolved so much in time that we evolved and changed into a new building, a new studio to actually record this stuff in. You know, Hunter Pickoff kind of made famous the Recording Innovation Park thing. And I am now keeping that tradition alive, I guess, by recording this one in the Willard building in the new media center.
Yeah, I know. They always used to shout out the Bald on Lie podcast, the obligatory shout out there. They always used to do that. One person in the studio, one person out of the studio kind of thing. I know if I had known you were going to be in the Willard building there to break in, as far as I know, the first PSSN podcast in the new building, I would have joined you there. But you're right. It has been a while. And, you know, for the Phillies and the Mets, you know, I don't know if we just sent a lot of bulletin board material that they posted in the clubhouse to motivate them. But they really just, especially the Mets. I mean, if you want to talk about the collapse there and where things are going, but it was a rough stretch for them. I mean, we kind of talked last at the deadline. They made some big moves at the deadline, and it wasn't, to be fair, it wasn't Javi Baez's fault where that team went. I mean, in fact, the trade deadline guy that they got played decently well outside of the controversy that went around there, but really the rest of the team kind of fell off. So what do you make of the second half Mets?
You know, Chris, I hate that we're starting right in with this Mets collapse, but yeah, a lot kind of happened in those last few months since the Javier Baez trade. And I hated that trade altogether, but he played really well, kind of like you said. But the one big thing that really struck a nerve with a lot of Mets fans was his, just thumbs down on the entire organization. Him and Francisco Lindor kind of headed that. The message was kind of dumb, in my opinion. When we're winning, you guys can't root with us because you were booing us before. It was unfortunate, especially to those fans that actually went to those games when the Mets were kind of out of it, especially since they took their time out of their day to pay money and watch these Mets play, and they're getting responded by getting thumbs down right back at them. The whole message just wasn't great, that Steve Cohen, Sandy Alderson, they had to do a lot of cleanup after that, and then the team just didn't play well. Noah Syndergaard had a brief kind of return. He played 2 games, had mixed results, finished with a 9 ERA, but kind of interesting that he came back. But a lot really happened with this New York Mets team. They were passed by both the Phillies and Braves in that division, and a lot of losing happened. A manager firing happened yesterday with Luis Rojas getting fired after his second season. So they're on the full search for a new manager. They tried to reach out to Theo Epstein to kind of run baseball operations. Didn't work out. Billy Beane might not work out as well. So there's a lot of work that has to be done in the offseason for the Mets. They got big free agents too. Marcus Stroman, Javier Baez, we talked about before, Michael Conforto, Noah Syndergaard. A lot of decision-making has to be made.
Positions to fill. I mean, think about it really from a front office standpoint. It's hard to go about giving guys like Conforto and Syndergaard, contracts here, and Stroman, those big contracts when you don't have the front office in place. So for them not being able to get, obviously there's other guys out there besides Theo Epstein, Billy Beane, some of the big names, but they really do need to make a hiring pretty quickly here. I think either sometime during October or November, definitely well before the winter meetings, because they have a big offseason ahead of them in the player contract side as well. Now, excuse me, the Luis Rojas decision was interesting. I didn't, I didn't think he was necessarily, I didn't think he was a culture issue there. I actually thought, outside of whatever you want to call it, if it was a fight in the clubhouse or they saw a raccoon or whatever they said at the time, I mean, the clubhouse I thought was pretty tight knit. Now, of course, the whole fan thing happened and that was ridiculous, but I thought Rojas did a pretty decent job, and I mean the culture seemed pretty good from at least from the outside. There was some managerial mistakes there, obviously. Now, I don't know what kind of route they'll go here, because Rojas was a young guy. Do you think that with more of a well-established kind of a Joe Girardi hire, or do you think they go again to kind of a new up-and-coming manager?
I kind of liked the Luis Rojas hiring first of all, but I'm kind of in favor of sticking with that younger guy. We kind of saw, especially looking at the Phillies, when they hired a Joe Girardi type guy to kind of work with these veteran guys, and that really hasn't been working. It's kind of had the similar results that Gabe Kapler had when he was with Philadelphia, and that's who I kind of compare Luis Rojas to right now. I feel like he's definitely a guy where this won't be his last managerial job in the MLB. I think he'll definitely find a way to bounce back. I just don't think that this Mets roster, the way it was constructed for this season, was for Rojas. I think, especially in a New York market, which requires a lot of success early on, there was a lot of pressure on Rojas. And whenever he had a bad managerial decision, it was put under a microscope. And they were in a lot of one-run games, the Mets were, and there were a lot of injuries, and there were a lot of players not performing the way they normally would, which you can't really blame entirely on Rojas. So I feel like if he were to get another shot, maybe in a smaller market, kind of like Gabe Kapler did with the Giants, who he was put in a perfect organization. I know we're going to talk about that later on, where he's in a perfect fit, but I could definitely see Rojas kind of flourishing somewhere else. And I kind of hope the Mets find themselves in the position to hire someone like that younger up and coming type manager once again.
Yeah, Gabe Kapler. Not, you know what? I for one have never said anything bad about Gabe Kapler. That's for sure. But as far as the Mets go this season, it is interesting in that the roster construction, like if you take the guys on paper and say, okay, they're just going to have a career average year, I think they win that division. I mean, if you put all of them just to their career norms, they do. I mean, the problem is Francisco Lindor, Michael Conforto, and then you got guys like Jeff McNeil and James McCann all underachieved. I mean, that's half the lineup. That can't happen. And again, on paper, McNeil's a guy that can hit 300. Conforto's a guy that can hit 30 homers. Same with Francisco Lindor, can hit 30 plus homers. James McCann had been one of the better catchers the last couple of years and completely fell apart this year. So to me, I don't even know who you can really blame. I don't think you can blame. I don't think you can blame, honestly, management for the way the roster was constructed, just because if these guys have average years, it's a pretty good team. I mean, I do blame, really, I think the players themselves have to be better. I mean, that's, at some point there's teams where I know the Mets still have some money left to throw around, actually a lot now, but there comes a point where, and this is kind of where the Phillies are at, you have to have internal improvements. I mean, the roster is what it is. You need the guys to play up to the stats on the back of the baseball card. And a lot of the guys really didn't for the vast majority of the season. Now, the last thing I'll get into with the Mets is, obviously, I said before, it's a big off season. Who are you re-signing? And first of all, do you give Conforto the qualifying offer?
I don't think you really give Conforto that qualifying offer. I do think you try and re-sign him, though. I mean, it's definitely a toss-up, but there are a lot of guys that the Mets are going to have to give the qualifying offers to. I think Javier Baez definitely the big guy you need to resign. And yeah, I've mentioned I wasn't a big fan of the Javier Baez trade, but you don't give up a top 5 prospect to only get a half year, just 2 months out of him. So I think the Mets are kind of in a position where they have to give big money to him. There's going to be a big market for Marcus Stroman as well. So he's going to be a big guy you're going to have to re-sign. Seth Lugo's another big name they're going to have to re-sign. Noah Syndergaard's kind of a question mark where you don't know if the Mets are going to re-sign him. And I think Michael Conforto might be in that same boat where you don't know whether or not he'll come back. And I think if it were up to me, I definitely would sign him. But I also would be okay with like a Nick Castellanos as well. But I would still try and get Michael Conforto. And I think he can come cheaper just because he did have a terrible year hitting wise last year. And he's been kind of inconsistent when it comes to those years. In his second year, he got sent down to AAA for a brief portion of time. He had a all-star year right after that. He had a kind of down year once again in 2018, but he had another great year during the COVID season in 2020. So it's really kind of a toss-up when it comes to Michael Conforto, and you don't really give a guy like that a qualifying offer, even though he does have that one shiny all-star appearance.
Yeah, it'll be interesting to see what they do with Conforto there. I mean, from the looks of it now, obviously the luxury tax could go up this year. The whole new CBA needs to be negotiated, which we'll probably get into that at some point over the off season. But roughly, I think probably 70 to 80 million in in terms of money to spend on free agents and re-sign. Stroman's going to be a big one. I already saw he loves to, and I think it's actually pretty fun, play the Twitter games. I saw he was talking to some of the Blue Jays fans about possibly having, reuniting there in Toronto next year, which that would be another great fit. I mean, if you add him to that team this year, they're definitely in the playoffs, possibly even up there with the Rays for the division. But it'll be interesting. Conforto, I actually do think that they give him the qualifying offer. And if he turns that down, I'd be shocked too. I think he returns on that 1 year. I think it's $20 million qualifying offer, but we'll have to see. I believe those have to be made typically in November. So I'm sure we'll hear probably after the World Series on that. Now, I do want to talk a little bit about the rest of the NL East, what happened with the Phillies and the Braves here before we get into our playoff preview. But my Phillies, man, it's just, I have to, I guess, congratulate this team. They went over 500 for the first time in a decade. Like, here's the thing. I get Mets fans you haven't seen your World Series, and I get that. But if you had to choose, actually, this is probably a stupid question because I'm sure you'd take the World Series, but man, not making the playoffs for 10 straight years now, it's brutal. And the way that they did it, going to Atlanta and getting swept like that is just not fun. I mean, this Atlanta team, do you think that they're for real right now?
No, I don't think so. I think they got very lucky with the division they're in. I mean, normally when you win 88 games in a season, you're typically not going to be in the running for a division crown. Like, you'll probably be a wild card team at most, and they wouldn't have even been a wild card team in the AL. They just got lucky that teams like the Phillies, teams like the Mets kind of tripped over themselves. And despite losing Acuna, despite not having Mike Soroka on the team at all, they were able to win just because they're consistent. They got really lucky with the position they were in. And I know the question you were going to ask if you would rather be the Phillies or the Mets. And to answer that one very simply, I would remember the day that the Mets won the World Series for the rest of my life. I wouldn't care about the next 10 years. That shiny World Series ring would mean so much. It would mean the world, especially when the Mets only have 2 rings. The Phillies have a little more, but the Mets, they only have 2 rings. So that means a lot.
Listen, the dust is collecting on those rings, though. I mean, it is like, I think back to it, I'm like, oh, man, can't believe that was, in 08. But now it's like, Yeah, I mean, it's something that you do remember for the rest of your life. But at this point, it's like, okay, like we have the second longest drought now in baseball. I really wanted Seattle to make it. I really did. Just to claim that we now had the longest playoff drought, I thought would have been maybe a bit motivating for the front office. But for the Phillies front office, I don't really know where you go because we'll talk about it. I mean, Bryce Harper, in my mind, and yes, I'm biased, is probably the MVP this year in the National League, I think. So you have the MVP and you have Zach Wheeler, who will probably get some Cy Young votes, and Ranger Suarez, who probably isn't on most people's radars because I think he only pitched like 110 innings, finished with like a 1.6 ERA. Like he very well could get a couple of Cy Young votes as well. And yet they didn't even get the wild card. They didn't win the division in the worst division in the league. I don't know where you go from here. I mean, the Mets going forward, I get how frustrating this year was for the Mets and the last couple of years, really. But they have a way forward. You still have DeGrom, who will hopefully be back next year and fully healthy. You still have a lineup that, when performing, which they didn't really at all this year, should be good, and they have the prospects to back that up. In that division, I'm still taking the Mets down the road to be a very competitive team. Would you agree with that?
Definitely. And I think we saw kind of before the year started how much Steve Cohen was willing to invest in his ball club. So I think we'll see kind of a competitive spending team when it comes to free agency. He had a full year to kind of see what went wrong with this Mets organization. And I think first you got to bring everyone back, got to find the right manager, find the right hitting coach. And it just starts there by getting everyone on track. I think the roster that the Mets have right now could very well be competitive down the road. I think they just need a few more pieces, not really any big pieces, but just a few more pieces in the bullpen, maybe a fourth or fifth starter. I don't think they need anyone major, but the Phillies, when you look at their end, I think, rotation bullpen might be the key there. I mean, we saw how great that lineup was before Rhys Hoskins got hurt, and I think that kind of threw everything off there for a little bit towards that end of the season. So maybe just a few pieces in the lineup there as well. But to me, I still think that pitching is still the number one priority there.
Yeah, the delusional Phillies fan in me, delusional Phillies fan in me says that we were Rhys Hoskins away from possibly winning that division. We probably weren't, but I mean, it's tough. It's tough when you're throwing a bullpen game every fifth day because of the way the organization handled free agency and the way the upper minors depth is, and then the bullpen is, you're throwing out guys like Neftali Feliz, who was good like 5-6 years ago, in high leverage spots. Organizationally, they just weren't built correctly. Whereas the Mets, I know that they struggled this year and really underperformed, possibly even, I think they underperformed even more than the Phillies did, but the Mets have that foundation there, whereas the Phillies, outside of Harper and Wheeler and Hoskins, they don't have a big enough foundation for me going forward. So I do think this will be an interesting offseason, really for the Mets and Phillies, really to kind of chart the course for how to eventually unseat the Braves here going forward. But I want to turn things now over to the Braves because let's start our playoff preview here. Braves and Brewers, who you got?
I think this is one of the more interesting series we'll see in the NLDS. And I like the way these two teams match up. The Braves, we mentioned it, kind of got lucky due to a weak NL East, but the Brewers, we typically have seen them in the playoffs in the past years due to their lineup, not really because of that rotation, which now features Corbin Burns, Brandon Woodruff. Both of them had really great seasons, and they still have Josh Hader there to close games. So there is a lot to like about this Brewers pitching staff, and they still have a solid lineup as well, with a few pretty good names as well to look out for. But the Braves, they're still, even without Ronald Acuna, still have a solid lineup with Freddie Freeman, Ozzie Albies, Dansby Swanson, Jorge Soler, guys in the outfield they kind of got to replace Acuna. But what really prevents me from picking the Atlanta here is that rotation has been kind of off all year. Ian Anderson and Max Fried have kind of been up and down during the season. And with those being your top two guys, other than Charlie Morton, who actually had a solid year, it makes it hard for me to think that the Braves can hang with this Milwaukee Brewers team, which has been around for a while. Both these teams have been around, but I think that the Brewers are in better position to win. So I'm going to go with Brewers in 4 here.
This is a tough one for me, and I think this might actually, well, I was going to say could be the best series, and it could be, but I'm not sure. Pitching wise, the Braves can possibly match up with Milwaukee. I do give Milwaukee the edge. I mean, Corbin Burns has been electric. So is Woodruff and Peralta. The good news for the Braves, though, is that a lot of their guys, like Max Fried and Charlie Morton, have been the best they've been all year right now. I mean, I got to pull up Morton's stats, but down the stretch here in the second half, he has been about as good as anybody in the league. And what makes it all the more impressive considering, he's 37 years old. He's not young anymore. He's got a 2.43 ERA in his last 7 starts. So, if you're the Braves, I think you got to split on the road in Milwaukee. So you either got to beat Burns or Woodruff, which is easier said than done. But that lineup, even without Acuna, has been really good. I mean, obviously you have Freddie Freeman, but Austin Riley has been the big piece this year. In fact, I think Austin Riley should get some votes for MVP. I know that sounds bad coming from a Phillies fan, but he deserves it. I mean, he has had an awesome year. I think he's the most improved player in all of baseball this year. I mean, he's put up stats that are identical to Freddie Freeman, yet I feel like people don't really know him as a guy that can be up there with Freddie Freeman. So to have two guys that, are Freddie Freeman-like in your lineup is impressive. That you still have a lot of power with Duvall, Swanson, Albies in that lineup, more so than the Brewers lineup has. I'm going to take the Braves in 5. I know it's kind of a bit of a surprise here. I think that lineup is still good enough that if they can beat one of the Brewers' 3-headed monsters, so Burns, Woodruff, Peralta, and get into, the back end of that rotation, I think that they can take that series. So really, we'll know in the first 2 games of Milwaukee. If they split in Milwaukee, I feel confident Braves in 5. So moving on to the other series in the NL, although I guess we don't technically know yet, but how would you feel about either Cards or Dodgers against the Giants? For me, a little spoiler, I don't think it's going to matter because I think Gabe's guys are going to carry here.
I think this is really going to matter in terms of who wins the wild card for me. And you're gonna be surprised, Chris. I'm going with the Cardinals. I think the Cardinals will finish the Dodgers off. It's a 1-0 game right now where we stand, and if this podcast goes out and the Dodgers come back, I will look really dumb. And that's a spoiler alert compared to what's going to come up later down the road. But I think the Cardinals will play the Giants, and the Cardinals are going to win. That's how I think right now. The Cardinals have been, and this is one of the bigger storylines we've seen in baseball the last month. The Cardinals have been the hottest team in baseball. Those teams are hard to stop when it gets into October. Adam Wainwright has turned back the clocks. He is a Cy Young contender right now. He might get a lot of votes to win that Cy Young award right now. He's currently out dueling Max Scherzer. And that lineup has looked phenomenal during that winning streak. And they have a lot of guys that can rake. Paul Goldschmidt, Nolan Arenado, Tyler O'Neill, Paul DeYoung, Dylan Carlson. A lot of these guys went off during that last month of the season. And these guys can all hit. The one thing that really concerns me might be the rest of that pitching staff, but it's a veteran staff. And a lot of these guys have been in these postseason games before. If John Lester or J.A. Happ get some innings, I think they can do really well because they've been in those situations before. But even still, you have Adam Wainwright, you have Jack Flaherty, you have Kwang Hyun Kim, and that's a solid 3. to open up a postseason with. Like that is a very solid three. And what worries me about the Giants, I know that they have the best record in the MLB. I'm a little bit worried about that pitching staff. And now they've been one of the best pitching staffs during the regular season, but they don't really have a ton of postseason experience outside of guys like Alex Wood and Johnny Cueto. A lot of these guys are veteran guys, but they haven't really seen the postseason yet. Desclafani, guys like that, they haven't really seen the postseason. Kevin Gausman hasn't really seen much of it either. And that lineup, they are pretty well rounded, but I think head to head, that Cardinals lineup, especially considering, and this is very important, especially considering how hot they've been, I think they're the better lineup right now. I'm going to go with the Cardinals. And this kind of shows that the wild card might need to be changed because the Dodgers won 106 games and they might not even make it to this round.
Oh, calling out Manfred there to change the rules. I like it. I actually do kind of agree with you there that the playoff format should be changed. Please expand it so my Phillies could get in. But either way, probably should be changed. I mean, if you have one of the better teams of all time, which in my opinion this Dodgers team on paper doesn't make it past tonight, that is pretty bad look for the league. So
right. I might hold off on my prediction. The Dodgers did just tie it.
Oh, there you go. Okay. This is, it's a live podcast. Breaking news happens all the time. Even if the Dodgers win, I don't know. There's just something, and I'm sure now that I don't doubt them this time, it'll come back to bite me. But I've doubted the Giants. I think it was in 2019 when they were decent. They didn't make the playoffs. I doubted them that entire year, and they kind of never really fell off. They always hung around. And now this year, I continually doubted them really up until the end. I mean, even up until the last series of the year, I thought that the Dodgers would win that division. And obviously they didn't. So I feel like I have to take the Giants because of how much I've doubted them and how much they've proved me wrong all year. I know they don't really have a ton of experience, and that does worry me. But, I mean, again, if these guys pitch the way they did down the stretch, like Logan Webb, like Anthony DeSclafani, like Kevin Gausman and Alex Wood, then they should be fine. I mean, I get that they do have a pretty inexperienced team as far as playoffs go, but I'm not sure how much experience matters when you do have some leadership, like a guy like Brandon Crawford, Buster Posey, Evan Longoria. So the pitching staff is inexperienced, but the lineup has those guys from the old core, which is really important because that old core, I don't know what they did out there with those guys, but they had some kind of voodoo magic back in like 2010, 12, and 14, where they also were not great, just like this team. They were not a phenomenal team on paper, and yet they just pulled games out of nowhere and won them. And I attribute that to these guys in the locker room, like Posey, Crawford, and Longoria. And of course, Brandon Belt's still there, but he's been hurt. So I think that veteran leadership will come up big. Gabe, it'll be really interesting to see him in the playoffs. Personally, I'm rooting for him. I think it would be pretty interesting to see if he won a World Series after getting fired in Philly. That would be a lot of fun in Philly sports talk radio for sure. But I think that they could get it done. I mean, this year against the Dodgers, they played them very competitively, and the Dodgers should be a better team on paper, but head to head, they really weren't. So I got to choose the Giants. I think that's going to go to Game 7 in San Fran, and San Fran takes it there. I think that's going to be an instant classic, though, that series.
So Game 7 in a 5-game series?
Oh, I'm sorry. Game 5. You're right. Although I am a proponent that if they're going to change the playoff rules, and I know the problem is they'd be playing deep into November at this point. I hate that the NLDS is 5. It's such a Mickey Mouse rule, in my opinion. Like, if you have a 107-win team versus a 106-win team, give them the full series. None of that 5-game garbage. you really test the depth over 7 games, and that's how you find out who the better team is. But we'll save the playoff alterations for another pod. But that's who I'm taking in 5 games to the max in the NLDS. I'll take the Giants over the Dodgers there at Oracle Park, which, by the way, really tough park to play at, I feel like. I don't know what it is about that place. Again, maybe it's because I've watched too much of my Phillies go out there, but it feels very hard to play. Just like a massive stadium that the Giants, by the way, like led the league, I believe it was, in homers, and yet that stadium still feels impossible to hit it out of. So, again, weird like voodoo magic from Gabe's guys out there in San Fran. But moving on to the ALDS, Red Sox Rays in a series that the Toronto Blue Jays should have been in. Still mad about that. I mean, please give me somebody I can root for. Like, I don't know how you felt the other night during the game. I'm so tired of Red Sox Yankees. Like, I get it's a classic rivalry. I'm still tired of it.
Yeah, I for one love the Jeff Passan chaos tweets that he was going on when it was Red Sox, Yankees, Blue Jays, Mariners all fighting for 2 playoff spots. And I was so rooting for Blue Jays, Mariners. I just wanted anyone but those Red Sox and Yankees. But as long as the Yankees didn't win, I'm okay with it. I mean, now we can at least watch the Red Sox, so I don't really care too much about. But this series, I think it's going to be pretty fun. You got 2 AL East rivals, and I think I'm just going to go with Boston here. Kind of similar to the Cardinals pick. The Red Sox have been on fire, and this isn't like last year where it was a 60-game season and the Rays bullpen is well rested. That bullpen has been through 162 games, and they're going to be more tired. They're already they've already been through a lot. It's 100 more games than last year. And that's a big reason why they were able to go to the World Series was on the backs of their bullpen. And this team is kind of similar, if not more invested into the bullpen after they trade away Blake Snell. And that lineup's still about the same, where it's not really a lot of star power. Yeah, they added Wander Franco, who has had a decent rookie season, but that lineup's still about the same, where it's kind of average in terms of the rest of the league. And they are always trying to get by on their pitching staff. And I think that luck kind of runs out against the Red Sox, who have had a really well-rounded team. And they definitely bounced back in terms of where they were last year, where they didn't even make the playoffs in an expanded 2020 season during that playoff time. So I like the Red Sox here. I'm going to say Sox in 5.
This is a tough one. And the pitching for this series is going to be pretty rough, I think. I mean, I'm assuming from what it looks like, I've heard Eduardo Rodriguez is going to be the game 1 starter. Not sure how true that is. So you'll have Rodriguez. I'm assuming Chris Sale and Nate Eovaldi, which is fine, but again, if you need a 4th starter for one of those games, it could get rough. And I'm not sure how much I trust the middle part of the bullpen for Boston. The other key piece for Boston is going to be JD Martinez. I haven't heard if he's a yet for this series. He's been banged up. He wasn't available for the wild card. And there is still questions, it sounds like, as to whether he'll be available for the ALDS, which will be huge in a series like that. I still do think, however, though, that the Red Sox lineup, even without JD Martinez, is enough to get it done, just because Tampa's rotation, you kind of already hit a lot on their bullpen, so I won't really add on. I 100% agree with you there. But the rotation there for Tampa doesn't have really any experience. And I know I kind of said the same thing with San Fran. I kind of let that slide a little bit there because of the veteran leadership, but they really don't have a ton of that on this Tampa team. I mean, Shane McClanahan, I believe, going to be starting game 1. Game 2 might be Shane Baz. Both these guys are rookies here. And then probably Michael Wacha. He has a lot of experience, but they don't really have a really solidified rotation. And in my mind, you do need that in the playoffs. I know a lot of teams in the modern era kind of like to ride their bullpen, as evidenced by Tampa. But I mean, you look at a team like the Washington Nationals, they won that World Series using 3 starters the entire postseason, pretty much. I mean, I think they might have used a 4th starter here and there, but for the most part, they used 3 starters all the way through the postseason, and that's what you need. And I just don't think Tampa has that. Not that Boston does, but Boston has the better lineup than Tampa. I mean, unless Randy Arozarena and Nelson Cruz can really get going, just having Brandon Lau and Wander Franco, who, by the way, is also making a playoff debut, I don't think it's going to be enough to match Boston's star power. So I'll agree there. I'll go Sox. I'll actually go Sox in 4 there.
Not to mention that Shore bombs just continue to fly in Boston. He's been amazing since coming over from the Nationals, and he had a home run against the Yankees in that wild card.
That's true. That is true. I mean, they really do just have too much power, I think, in this series. And that Tampa's starting pitching isn't going to be enough, especially starting 2 young guys, which I think they're going to do in McClanahan and Baz. I don't see it there. I do think Boston takes that. I have them in 4 because I think they'll win it at home, but it could be 5, but we'll see. Moving on, though, to the other ALDS series now, and I think this will be a really good one. You know, I think, honestly, the White Sox, that is, don't get talked about a lot, or at least haven't been recently. But White Sox Astros, I think I don't want to call the White Sox America's team, but just because it's the Astros, the White Sox are probably now de facto America's team. So who do you have winning this one?
So if the White Sox are America's team, does that make Tony La Russa the president?
All right. I'm calling for impeachment there of Tony La Russa. We cannot, if he's, no, we cannot have that. I refuse. Listen, as founders of the Tony La Russa slander here on the podcast, can't have that. So I retract my statement.
Yeah, because we have talked about Tony La Russa in a lot of these podcasts, and a lot of that talk was negative. But the White Sox and that kind of drama has been quiet ever since we've gone off air. I mean, there hasn't really been much Tony La Russa slander to kind of report on, and thus the White Sox have kind of surged as of late. They were kind of beneficiaries of an easy division, kind of like the NL East, where there were no teams that finished with a winning record outside of the White Sox. The Indians had an 80-82 record, and then the Tigers, Royals, and Twins were all just flat out terrible. But I like this White Sox team. I think that that lineup was kind of hurt by not having Luis Robert, Eloy Jimenez for a good amount of the season. But Tim Anderson, Jose Abreu both had really solid years, and that rotation and bullpen, I think, is going to be the main difference for this White Sox team. They got Lance Lynn, Lucas Giolito, Carlos Rondon, who had a fantastic season, Dallas Keuchel. Like, that is a stacked rotation. And then you get late into games, you got Liam Hendricks and Craig Kimbrell closing out games for you. They made that trade, getting Kimbrell from the Chicago Cubs. So I think this White Sox team is definitely built for a deep playoff run. And I'm just going to go out and say it. I think whoever wins this series is going straight to the World Series. So, like, even if the Astros win, I do think that they'll go to the World Series. But I'm going to go White Sox in 4.
Wow. That bold prediction there. I like it. I've been torn on this one, but I think I have to go with the White Sox, which, by the way, I know, talking about the managers, I know Dusty Baker got thrown into a tough situation there in Houston, but the disparity of, I guess, how much you can like a manager between Dusty Baker and Tony La Russa is pretty wide. I've always been a Dusty Baker fan. Even in Washington, I actually did like him. But nonetheless, I think Tony La Russa's guys pull this one out. I agree. I think the pitching staff is really strong. And they kind of show that where they're not even starting. Carlos Rodon was phenomenal this year, and he's not even starting game 1 or 2. So far, they haven't announced their starters for 3, 4, and 5, but it looks like they're going to have Lance Lynn and Lucas Giolito as their first 2 starters here. And I think they match up really well. I mean, you look at a guy like Giolito, he again had another phenomenal year, posting a 3.53 ERA. His K per 9 was very high, over 10 once again. So doing what Lucas Giolito does, pretty good number 2, number 3 stats with flashes of being an ace. So between him, Lance Lynn, Dylan Cease has also been very good this year as well. I really think that they have the rotation depth. I know it's only a 5-game series, so they might not need it. I think they have the depth. They have the bullpen pieces with Liam Hendricks being just otherworldly this year, and Craig Kimbrell there to also supplement the back end of that bullpen. Question is going to be the lineup a little bit. You know, they've been banged up really all year. I still think that their pitching staff is enough to kind of supplement what their lineup will do. I mean, really, you have to hope Jose Abreu can do what Jose Abreu has done and did last year, and just kind of rakes. I mean, because that Houston offense is no joke. And I mean, they're probably one of the 5 deepest teams in the league this year. I mean, you just look at Altuve, Brantley, Bregman, Yordan Alvarez, Carlos Correa, Kyle Tucker, who has been awesome this year. They have a really deep lineup. It's just that pitching staff, Lance McCullers and Framber Valdez are good. I still give the White Sox the edge in those 2 pitching matchups to start out the series. And then after that, it's probably Odorizzi or Jose Urquidy. So I don't see either of them outdueling what the White Sox have to offer. And I also don't think Houston's bullpen is as good as what the White Sox have. So I think the White Sox can do, I don't want to say the unthinkable, but shut down Houston's offense enough and take that series. And I think that they'll do it in 5. I think that'll go the max there.
Yeah, I'm glad that we're both taking the same team there, but I think it's definitely going to be a very close series. And yeah, I think 4 or 5 games, I don't think it really makes too much of a difference there. I think it's going to be a fun battle. And the White Sox kind of had their experience last year. They got out in the first round. I think they might've played Oakland. I forgot who they played, but they lost in the first round when they were a pretty high seed in that 8-team or however many teams made it playoff in the AL side of things. But I think now they kind of had that chance to learn. I think they'll definitely take the next step.
Yeah, you're right. They did actually lose to Oakland in that wild card series. The AL Central was really good last year, but just completely fell off this year. Yeah, you know, the White Sox, if they were completely healthy, I'd be a little bit more sure of things there for them, because I think that they would, the gap between them and Houston's offense would shrink a bit. But as it is, I think that they're good enough to get the job done against Houston. That pitching staff is going to be the key, though. And I think with Lance Lynn and Giolito starting things out, I think they'll get the job done. Whether they would go to the World Series or not, I'm not sure. They'd have to convince me during the ALDS, but we'll have to see. Well, thank you for joining us back on Top Prospects. I know it's been a while, but we're gearing up for an exciting playoff run, and just happy to be able to watch some October baseball once again, and we'll see you next time.